My name is Lydia Brennan. I'm 28 years old. And 15 years ago my own parents threw me out of the house when I was 13. Last week, they showed up at my Uncle Gerald's will reading, the man who had raised me for the past 15 years with confident smiles and a private attorney, absolutely certain they would walk out with millions. But when attorney Catherine Merrill opened that sealed envelope and began reading aloud, those smiles disappeared. And when she reached clause 7, my mother, the woman who once declared I was no longer her daughter, shot to her feet, her face chalk white, her mouth hanging open in pure disbelief. To understand why she reacted that way, I need to take you back to the summer of 2010, when I was a 13-year-old girl who had been quietly convinced she was the source of every problem in her family. I grew up in a modest house in southeast Portland. I learned early that love in our household wasn't distributed equally. My father, Robert Brennan, worked as an auto mechanic at a shop downtown. He was a man of very few words, and most of those words simply agreed with whatever my mother said. My mother, Kathleen, ran the checkout line at a grocery store and managed our household with the practiced certainty of someone who always knew exactly who deserved what. My sister Amber was 2 years older than me. She had Mom's golden blonde hair, Mom's bright blue eyes, Mom's easy, unguarded laugh. Everyone said so. Amber looks just like you did at her age, Kathleen, and Mom would beam. I looked like our late grandmother, Dad's mother. Brown hair, brown eyes, a quiet way of moving through rooms. Mom never said it was a bad thing, she just never said much about me at all. The differences were everywhere. For Amber's 15th birthday, Mom threw a party with 15 guests, a 3-tier cake from the bakery on Hawthorne, and a rented karaoke machine. For my 13th birthday, 3 months later, it was the 4 of us around the kitchen table with a marked-down cake from the store where Mom worked. The frosting read "Happy Birthday" with no name, a generic leftover from someone else's cancelled order. I didn't understand what was happening until I was 12. That's when I discovered Amber had a college savings account that had been opened when she was 5 years old. 8 years of steady deposits. Thousands of dollars. I asked Mom why I didn't have one. She looked at me as though the question had genuinely surprised her. Amber needs money for college, she said. You'll figure something out, you're good at adapting. That was the first time I truly understood my place in that family. I was the spare child, kept around but never quite wanted. The summer of 2010 changed everything. In April of that year, I applied for the Oregon STEM Summer Academy at Oregon State University, a 6-week residential program for students who showed exceptional promise in science and mathematics. The scholarship covered everything: tuition, room and board, materials. Total value $4,200. I told no one I had applied. I had learned not to get my hopes up out loud in that house. On May 15th, the acceptance letter arrived. Out of over 2,000 applicants from across the state, 50 students had been selected. I was one of them. For exactly one afternoon, I felt like I mattered. Then Amber found out about a performing arts camp in California that her drama teacher had mentioned. 3 weeks, no scholarship. Price tag, $800. That evening at dinner, Mom announced the solution she had already worked out in her head. Lydia, you'll decline the science program. We can't send both of you to summer camps, and Amber's will help her college applications. She said it the way someone discusses meal planning, not like she was dismantling something important. I stared at my plate. The words came out before I could stop them. No. The whole table went silent. Even the refrigerator seemed to hold its breath. Excuse me, Mom's voice dropped to that particular register. I'd only heard her use on customers who tried to redeem expired coupons. This scholarship isn't yours to give away, I said. My voice was shaking, but it was clear. I earned it, it belongs to me. Mom looked at me as though I had become a stranger sitting in my own chair. If you can't sacrifice for this family, she said slowly, then you're not part of this family. At 13, I thought she was simply angry. I didn't understand that she meant it literally. 3 days after that dinner, I came home from the public library to find my belongings packed into 2 black garbage bags sitting on the front porch. My mother stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked resolved, like someone who had just finished an unpleasant but necessary task. I called Gerald, she said. He'll be here to pick you up. From now on, you're his problem. I stood on that porch. I had lived in that house my entire life and I couldn't process what I was looking at. Behind Mom, I could see my father standing in the hallway. He didn't look at me. He didn't say a word. I looked up at the second-floor window. Amber was watching from behind the curtain. When our eyes met, she stepped back into the shadow of her room. She didn't come down, she didn't come out. I waited on that porch from 6 in the evening until 10 at night. 4 hours. My mother went back inside after the first 5 minutes. The porch light never came on. Uncle Gerald lived in Seattle, 3 hours away. He drove through the night to reach me. When his grey Honda pulled into the driveway, I was still sitting on top of those garbage bags with my knees pulled to my chest. He got out without saying anything at first. He just walked up, looked at me, and pulled me into a hug so tight I couldn't breathe. "From now on," he said quietly, "you have a home." That night, as we drove north through the dark towards Seattle, I didn't know that my mother had signed a document before Uncle Gerald left the house. I didn't know what it meant. I was just a frightened kid staring out the passenger window, trying to figure out what I had done wrong. It would take 15 years for that document to surface again, and when it did, it would change everything. Uncle Gerald's house in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood wasn't large, but it felt enormous compared to the cramped space I'd been given in my family's home. For the first time in my life, I had a room that was entirely mine. More importantly, I had someone who believed in me. Uncle Gerald had built Brennan Property Holdings from scratch, a commercial real estate company he'd started with a single small office building, purchased after working double shifts for 6 years. By 2010, he owned 8 properties across the Seattle metro area. He had never married, never had children. When I arrived at his door with 2 garbage bags and nothing else, he didn't just take me in. He invested in me. Over the next 4 years, I poured myself into school. I graduated from Ballard High in 2014 as class valedictorian, president of the math club, a 4 unweighted GPA. The University of Washington offered me admission with a partial scholarship to their Foster School of Business. By 2018, I had my bachelor's degree in finance, graduating summa cum laude with a 3.94 GPA. Uncle Gerald had given me internship opportunities at Brennan Property Holdings starting my sophomore year. I learned the business from the ground up: data entry, lease analysis, tenant relations, property assessments. In 2019, after 18 months at a large accounting firm, I earned my CPA certification. 1 year later, Uncle Gerald offered me the position of controller. By 2021, I was CFO. On my 26th birthday, I was managing a portfolio of 12 commercial properties, with a combined value of $23.7 million. Uncle Gerald sent me an email that day. I still have it saved. The subject line read, "To my daughter." The message was simple: you don't need to prove anything to the people who abandoned you. But you do need to prove to yourself that you're worthy. You have. Happy birthday, Lydia. In 15 years, my biological family reached out exactly 3 times. The first was in 2012. My mother called Uncle Gerald's phone, not mine, to ask for $5,000. Robert had lost his job at the auto shop. Times were difficult. Surely Gerald could help his own brother-in-law. Uncle Gerald declined. He told me about the call afterward, his jaw tight. "They didn't ask about you once," he said. "Not how school is going, not whether you're okay, just money." The second contact came in 2016. Amber mailed me a wedding invitation. No personal note. No "I hope you're well," just the formal printed card with my name and Uncle Gerald's Seattle address. I didn't attend. I didn't send a gift. I didn't respond at all. The third was in 2020. My mother sent me an email, the first direct contact she had initiated since the night she put my things in garbage bags. The subject line read, "Checking in." The message mentioned that she'd seen an article in Seattle Business Journal about Brennan Property Holdings expanding into the East Side market. She hoped I was doing well and suggested we should catch up sometime. I deleted the email without responding. I wasn't holding grudges. I had simply built a life that didn't include them, and I saw no reason to change that. In the summer of 2024, Uncle Gerald received a diagnosis that rearranged everything. Congestive heart failure, advanced stage. The doctors gave him 12 to 18 months. He lasted 8. During those final months, he met with his estate attorney multiple times. He updated his will in June 2024, 6 months before he passed. When I asked him about it, he just smiled. "Everything's taken care of," he said. "You focus on the business. I've handled the rest." I didn't know what he'd written. I didn't know about the clauses. I trusted him completely, and I had no idea what was coming. Uncle Gerald passed away on February 28, 2025. He went peacefully in his sleep at Swedish Medical Center with me holding his hand. 1 week later, on March 7th, I was at my desk at Brennan Property Holdings when my phone buzzed with an unknown Portland number. I almost didn't answer. "Lydia," the voice was immediately recognizable. 15 years hadn't changed my mother's particular way of saying my name, like she was tasting something she wasn't certain she wanted. Kathleen. I kept my voice neutral. Not Mom, her name. A brief pause, I could almost hear her recalibrating. I heard about Gerald, she said. I'm so sorry for your loss. I was thinking I should come up for the memorial service, pay my respects. The memorial was 3 days ago. Another pause. Oh, well, I also heard there's a will reading scheduled. Family has a right to attend these things, you know, especially when it involves a close family member's estate. There it was, the real reason for the call. How did you find out about the will reading? I have an attorney, Victor. Well, he made some calls. I contacted Catherine Merrill, Uncle Gerald's estate attorney, the following morning. She confirmed what I suspected. Kathleen had retained an attorney and filed a claim challenging the will. The grounds: undue influence. The allegation that I had manipulated a sick and elderly man in his final months. They were also demanding to attend the will reading as immediate family members of the deceased. I sat at my desk staring at the photograph of Uncle Gerald that I kept on the corner shelf. In the picture, he was smiling, almost as though he had known this moment would come. Almost as though he had prepared for it. Catherine Merrill's office occupied the 47th floor of the Columbia Center. On a clear day you could see all the way to Mount Rainier. March 10th was not a clear day. Rain moved across the glass in long diagonal streaks as Catherine laid out the situation with the unhurried precision I had come to expect from her. Their attorney filed a formal challenge to the will on behalf of Robert and Kathleen Brennan, she said, sliding a document across her desk. The claim alleges undue influence. Their argument is that you isolated Gerald from his family during his illness and pressured him to alter his estate plan. I read through the filing, my stomach tightened with each paragraph. They're seeking 50% of the estate, Catherine continued. Their legal theory is that as Gerald's closest surviving relative by marriage, Robert is entitled to inherit under intestacy principles, or at minimum, receive a significant share reflecting the natural bonds of family. Natural bonds, I repeated. Robert and Gerald hadn't spoken in 8 years before I came to live with Uncle Gerald. Does that matter? I'm aware Gerald told me the entire history, but that's not the part of this filing that concerns me most. She pulled out another page. They don't necessarily need to win this case. If it proceeds to full litigation, the estate could be frozen for 12 to 18 months during discovery and trial. The properties need active management in the meantime. Tenants need attention. Bills need paying. A protracted legal battle could cost hundreds of thousands in fees and potentially devalue the entire portfolio. So they're betting I'll pay them off to make them disappear. That's the strategy, Catherine said. It's not uncommon in estate disputes. I looked down at the challenge filing. In the section describing our family history, Kathleen had written that I had abandoned my family and exploited Gerald's loneliness. The woman who packed my belongings into garbage bags and left me on the porch was claiming I had abandoned her. Do you have any documentation about your circumstances in 2010? Catherine asked. Anything that establishes what actually happened when you went to live with Gerald? I thought back to that night, the porch, the dark, the 4 hours of waiting. I was 13, I said. I didn't exactly keep records. Gerald did. Catherine was already reaching for her phone. She asked her assistant for a specific file number from the archives. 20 minutes later, the assistant returned with a yellowed folder. Catherine opened it carefully, scanning the contents. Then she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Lydia, did you know about this? She slid the document across the desk. The header read, Voluntary Relinquishment of Parental Rights and Transfer of Guardianship. Dated July 15, 2010. The document stated that Robert James Brennan and Kathleen Marie Brennan, being of sound mind, voluntarily relinquished all parental rights and responsibilities for their minor daughter, Lydia Marie Brennan, and transferred full legal guardianship to Gerald Raymond Brennan. At the bottom were 4 signatures. My mother's, my father's, Uncle Gerald's, and a notary public from King County, Washington. They didn't just throw you out, Catherine said quietly. They legally gave you up. They signed away their parental rights. As far as the law is concerned, Robert and Kathleen Brennan stopped being your parents the moment they put their names on this document. My hands were trembling. I had been 13 years old, sitting on a dark porch with 2 garbage bags. I'd had no idea my mother had been signing papers inside the house while I waited. What does this mean for their claim? Catherine's expression shifted. It means Robert has no standing to claim inheritance through familial relationship. Legally, he is not your parent. He severed that connection himself in writing, with witnesses, 15 years ago. She offered me two paths. The first, negotiation. She would reach out to their attorney, explain that their legal position was considerably weaker than they realized, and offer a settlement, somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million, in exchange for their withdrawing the challenge and signing a permanent waiver of future claims. Faster, cleaner, no public exposure. The second, proceed with the will reading exactly as scheduled. They had demanded to attend as family members. She would let them. Then she would present the evidence, the guardianship transfer, the full documented history, everything Uncle Gerald had wanted disclosed in the event of a challenge. He anticipated this, Lydia, Catherine said. He left specific instructions for exactly this scenario. He wanted the truth on the record. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room of the house Uncle Gerald had left me, looking at the photographs arranged along the mantel. There were pictures of me at every stage: high school graduation, college commencement, the day I received my CPA license, my first morning as CFO. In every photograph, Uncle Gerald was beaming at my side. There were no photographs of Robert or Kathleen, not one. I thought about something Uncle Gerald had written in that birthday email years ago. You don't owe them anything, but you owe yourself the truth. At 7 the next morning, I called Catherine. I want the will reading to proceed, I said. No settlement, no buyout. If they want to be in that room, let them, but we're not concealing anything. Are you certain, once this becomes part of the record? They made it public when they filed the challenge. I'm simply respecting their choice. The will reading was scheduled for Friday, March 14th, 2025 at 2 in the afternoon, in the Morrison & Associates conference room, 5 days away. My closest friend, Elena Torres, she had joined Brennan Property Holdings as HR director 3 years earlier, and was the only person besides Catherine who knew the full story of my childhood, helped me organize the documentation in the days that followed. 47 emails, Elena said, looking up from her laptop on Wednesday evening. 47 emails from Gerald to you over 10 years, documenting his relationship with you and his reasons for distancing himself from Robert. The picture those emails painted was clear. In 2002, Robert had borrowed $80,000 from Gerald with a written promise to repay within 5 years. 23 years later, not a single dollar had come back. That broken promise had fractured their relationship long before I arrived. My coming to live with Uncle Gerald in 2010 had nothing to do with their estrangement. It had already been rotting for 8 years. Elena also pulled the financial reports from my 3 years as CFO. Under my leadership, the Brennan Property Holdings portfolio had grown from $17.7 million to $23.7 million, a 34% increase in value. Occupancy rates averaged 96%. Tenant satisfaction scores were the highest in company history. On Thursday evening, I sat in the quiet office of Dr. Sarah Park, the therapist I'd been seeing since my early 20s. Remember why you're doing this, she said. You're not seeking revenge, you're closing a chapter. There's a difference. What if I feel something like satisfaction when they realize what they've walked into? Dr. Park smiled gently. That's called justice, Lydia. Feeling validated when the truth finally comes to light isn't the same as cruelty. The real question is what you do afterward. I drove home through Seattle's rain-slick streets thinking about her words. Before bed, I stood at the bathroom mirror for a long moment. She has no power over you anymore, I told my reflection. Only you get to decide your story now. Friday was coming, and I was ready. The Morrison & Associates conference room occupied a corner of the 47th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. On a clear day it would have been breathtaking. On March 14th, the sky was the color of pewter, the water below a flat, cold grey that matched the weight of the occasion. I arrived at 1:45, 15 minutes early. I wore a navy blue tailored suit, professional, understated, hair pulled back. I had learned from Uncle Gerald that the most powerful people in a room are rarely the ones who announce themselves. The conference room seated 20 at the main table, with additional chairs arranged along the walls. When I entered, 14 people were already present. Catherine sat at the head of the table with 2 junior associates. Thomas Ellison, the senior auditor who had handled Uncle Gerald's accounts for over a decade, occupied a seat near the window. Representatives from 3 charitable organizations filled several chairs: Seattle Children's Hospital, Habitat for Humanity Northwest, and the Olympic National Park Foundation. Uncle Gerald had been a significant donor to all 3 for more than 20 years. 5 senior staff members from Brennan Property Holdings sat together near the door, people who had worked with Uncle Gerald for years and had known me since my intern days. Catherine caught my eye and nodded toward a seat at the center of the table, directly across from where she would be reading the will. I sat down, arranging the folder Elena had prepared in front of me. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see the elevator lobby. At 2:03 the doors opened. My mother stepped out first. Even from across the floor I could see she had dressed for the occasion. Black dress, pearl necklace, full makeup. Behind her came my father, then Amber, then a man in an expensive suit carrying a Mont Blanc briefcase. The performance was about to begin. Kathleen Brennan entered the conference room the way she entered every room she'd ever walked into, as though she already owned it. She wore a black dress that looked recently purchased, and her pearls caught the overhead light as she surveyed the space with an expression she had carefully arranged to read as dignified grief. Behind her, my father Robert shuffled in wearing a grey suit that no longer quite fit. He'd gained weight in the years since I'd last seen him. His eyes found me briefly, then moved away. He had always been skilled at looking away. Amber followed in a pastel pink dress, an odd choice for a will reading, as though she'd gotten the occasion confused with something else. At 30, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with an early flight from Portland. Their attorney brought up the rear, tall, silver-haired, with the polished confidence of someone who had spent decades in high-stakes litigation. His briefcase probably cost more than my first month's salary at the accounting firm. Kathleen's gaze swept the room until it landed on me. "Ah," she said, her voice carrying in that particular way she had perfected. "You're here already." I didn't stand. Kathleen, her name, not Mom, landed between us and made her pause mid-stride. Something moved across her face. Then she recovered. "I was hoping we could speak privately before this begins. Family matters are best handled by family." "The proceedings start in 2 minutes," I said. "I'm sure whatever you need to say can wait." Catherine rose from her seat. "Mrs. Brennan, Mr. Brennan, Ms. Brennan, Mr. Harrington, there are chairs arranged for attending parties along the wall. The main table is reserved for beneficiaries and estate representatives." Kathleen's jaw tightened visibly. She had expected a seat at the center of things. Instead, she was being directed to the margins. She wasn't even at the table. She didn't take her seat quietly. She detoured past the representative from Seattle Children's Hospital, pausing to introduce herself with an expression of practiced sorrow. "I'm Kathleen Brennan," she said at a volume calibrated for most of the room. "Gerald's sister-in-law. We were quite close for many years before this unfortunate estrangement." She glanced meaningfully in my direction. The hospital representative, a woman in her 50s, nodded politely and said nothing. Kathleen pressed on. "It's so tragic how some people enter a family and create division. Gerald was such a generous man, so trusting, perhaps too trusting." I kept my eyes on my folder. I didn't respond. I had learned long ago that Kathleen sustained herself on reactions. Amber, settling into a chair against the wall, added her piece. "Uncle Gerald used to visit us in Portland all the time when we were little. I don't understand why she gets a seat at the table and we're back here." Their attorney was already writing, his pen moving steadily across a legal pad, recording everything, building their case, watching for any reaction he could use. I gave him nothing. Kathleen took her seat beside Amber, but she wasn't finished. As Catherine organized her papers at the head of the table, Kathleen's voice moved through the quiet room one more time. "A child who gets pushed out of her own family usually has a reason for it. I just wish Gerald had seen through her the way we did. A mother always knows." The words settled over the room. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Thomas Ellison, the auditor, was staring at Kathleen with open disbelief. I truly looked at her for the first time in 15 years. She hadn't changed at all. The same certainty. The same compulsive need to control the story. The same absolute conviction that she was the wronged party in every room she entered. Catherine cleared her throat. "It's 2:10, we'll begin." Catherine Merrill broke the seal on a large envelope with the careful precision of someone who had performed this ritual many times. "This is the last will and testament of Gerald Raymond Brennan," she began, her voice carrying the formal gravity the moment demanded. "Born July 4, 1953. Deceased February 28, 2025. This document was executed on June 18, 2024, and represents the final expression of Mr. Brennan's wishes regarding the disposition of his estate. Kathleen sat forward slightly, her pearls catching the light. Catherine continued through the preliminary articles. Article 1 confirmed Uncle Gerald's identity and residence. Article 2 declared him to be of sound mind. Catherine noted that a psychiatric evaluation had been conducted by Dr. Stephen Park on June 10, 2024, 8 days before the will was signed, and that the evaluation confirmed Mr. Brennan possessed full testamentary capacity and was acting under no undue influence at the time of execution. I watched Kathleen exchange a glance with their attorney. They had been counting on challenging Uncle Gerald's mental state. This documentation complicated that strategy considerably. Article 3 revoked all prior wills and codicils. Then Catherine moved to Article 4, the inventory of assets. At the time of death, Mr. Brennan's estate included 12 commercial properties throughout King and Snohomish counties, with a combined assessed value of $18.2 million. Investment accounts containing diversified equity holdings valued at approximately $4.1 million. Cash and liquid assets totaling $1.4 million. I heard Amber whisper to Kathleen, "That's almost $24 million. Kathleen nodded, her eyes calculating quickly. Catherine looked up briefly. The will contains 47 pages. I will now proceed to Article 5, which addresses specific bequests and exclusions. She turned the page and adjusted her reading glasses. Article 5, regarding Robert James Brennan, brother-in-law of the deceased. Kathleen actually smiled. She would not be smiling for long. Catherine's voice remained steady as she read the opening line. I make no provision in this will for Robert James Brennan for the following reasons, which I wish to be read aloud and entered into the official record. Kathleen's smile faltered. Catherine continued, reading Uncle Gerald's words in full. First, in March of 2002, Robert borrowed $80,000 from me with a written promise to repay the full amount within 5 years. 23 years have passed. Not $1 has been returned. I have retained the original promissory note as documentation. Robert's face went the color of old paper. He hadn't expected this. Second, on July 15, 2010, Robert and his wife Kathleen voluntarily executed a legal document relinquishing all parental rights to their daughter, Lydia Marie Brennan, transferring full guardianship to me. This document was properly witnessed and notarized. Kathleen was on her feet before Catherine finished the sentence. What does that have anything to do with? Catherine paused, looked at Kathleen over her reading glasses with the calm composure of someone who had prepared for exactly this moment, and continued reading without acknowledging the interruption. The significance of this document is as follows. By legally terminating their parental relationship with Lydia, Robert and Kathleen severed any claim they might have otherwise held to inherit from me through her. Lydia is my legal heir. Robert is not her legal father. Therefore, Robert has no familial relationship with my designated heir, and no standing to challenge this will on grounds of family connection. Robert was on his feet now too. This is absolutely ridiculous. Gerald's brother, his blood brother. Their attorney grabbed Robert's arm and pulled him back down into his chair, but even his face had gone grey. Catherine reached into her file and produced a document. For the record, the original voluntary relinquishment of parental rights is on file with King County Family Court, file number 2010 GH5847. I have a certified copy here, which any party may examine. She placed it on the table. Kathleen stared at it the way you stare at something you can't believe is real. Kathleen didn't sit back down. The careful composure she had carried into the room cracked visibly. Her voice rose, sharp and unsteady. This is insane. That paper doesn't mean anything. We're still her family. Catherine's voice remained perfectly level. Mrs. Brennan, I must ask you to take your seat. Disrupting a will reading is a matter the court takes seriously. Kathleen ignored her. She pointed directly across the table at me. She did this. She turned Harold against his own family. She poisoned him against us. Dr. Patricia Wells from Seattle Children's Hospital looked visibly uncomfortable. The charity representatives hadn't come prepared for a family unraveling in front of them. Amber reached up and tugged at Kathleen's sleeve. Mom, sit down. People are watching. I don't care who's watching. Kathleen's voice cracked. I want to know how this is even possible. Gerald loved Robert, they were brothers. I spoke then. My voice came out calm and steady, the way Uncle Gerald had taught me to speak in difficult negotiations. Never raise your voice, make them strain to hear you. Kathleen, you made a choice 15 years ago. You packed my belongings into garbage bags, left me on a porch in the dark, and then went back inside and signed a document giving me away. I was 13 years old. The room went absolutely still. That was your decision, I continued. Not mine, not Uncle Gerald's, yours. Everything happening in this room today is simply the consequence of what you chose to do that night. Kathleen's mouth opened, nothing came out. I don't hate you, I said, meeting her eyes steadily. But I don't owe you anything either. You made certain of that when you signed that paper. Their attorney was writing furiously on his legal pad, though I couldn't imagine what strategy he believed he could still salvage. Catherine cleared her throat. If we may continue, we haven't yet reached Clause 7. Kathleen finally sank back into her chair. Clause 7 was the one that would end her hopes entirely. Catherine turned to page 12 of the will and paused. Then she read the words that would change everything. Article 7, Designation of Sole Beneficiary. The room held its breath. I hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including all real property, investment accounts, liquid assets and personal effects, to my legally adopted daughter, Lydia Marie Brennan. Adopted. The word hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water. Kathleen's face went white, genuinely, completely white, as though something had been drained from her all at once. Adopted, Robert's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Since when? Catherine answered with the same unhurried precision she had maintained throughout. Mr. Gerald Brennan formally adopted Lydia Marie Brennan on September 12, 2012, when she was 15 years old. The adoption was finalized in King County Family Court, file number 2012, AD 3291. As Mr. and Mrs. Robert Brennan had already legally relinquished their parental rights in 2010, no additional consent was required. Amber stared at me. So you're not related to us anymore. I met her eyes, not legally, not since Mom and Dad signed me away. Catherine continued reading. Lydia is not merely a beneficiary. She is my daughter in every way that matters, legally, practically, and in my heart. She has worked alongside me for years, demonstrated her competence and integrity without fail, and I trust her completely to carry forward the work I began. There is no one more deserving of this inheritance, and no one I love more. My vision blurred. I blinked, but the tears came anyway. Uncle Gerald had never told me about the full language of this clause. He had kept it back, waiting for this exact moment, knowing it might one day be necessary. Kathleen was shaking her head slowly, the motion of someone trying to wake from a dream that won't release them. This can't be legal, she whispered. Tell them it can't be legal. Their attorney didn't answer. He was staring at his legal pad, pen completely still. He knew the case was finished. Catherine reached into her folder and withdrew a smaller sealed envelope. There is one additional item. Mr. Brennan left a personal letter for Lydia, with instructions that I offer to read a portion aloud during this proceeding, should Lydia consent. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Catherine opened the envelope carefully and unfolded a single handwritten page. Uncle Gerald's familiar script filled it, the same handwriting I had seen on birthday cards, on desk notes, on emails over 15 years of being his. Catherine began to read. Lydia, if this letter is being read aloud, it means things unfolded exactly as I expected. Your biological family showed up looking for money they never earned, from a man they never truly cared about. I'm sorry you have to endure this, but I also know you are strong enough to handle it. A soft sound escaped Kathleen's throat, barely audible, almost a whimper. You came to me as a wounded child, thrown away by people who were supposed to protect you. But you didn't allow that to define you. You turned your pain into determination, your loneliness into independence, your rejection into something that made you remarkable. I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. Catherine's voice softened slightly as she continued. I didn't save you, Lydia. You saved yourself. I simply gave you a place to do it. Everything you have built, your education, your career, your character, you earned through your own effort and your own courage. I'm leaving you my estate not because you need it, but because you deserve it. And because I know you will use it to help others the way I tried to help you. Tears were moving down my face now. I let them. Don't let them make you feel guilty for surviving them. Don't let them back into your life unless you choose to. You owe them nothing. You owe yourself everything. I love you, Lydia. Forever your father, Gerald. Kathleen made one final attempt. She rose from her chair again, but this time the anger had gone out of her voice. What replaced it was something designed to sound like wounded, genuine motherhood. Lydia, sweetheart, I know things were difficult when you were young. I made mistakes. I can admit that now, but we're still blood. We can work through this together. Can't we at least sit down and discuss dividing the estate fairly? I wiped my eyes and looked at her. You gave up the right to call me sweetheart 15 years ago. I want to contest this will, Kathleen announced to the room, her voice firming again. Tell them we have grounds, undue influence. Gerald was ill. She isolated him from us. Their attorney finally spoke, though he sounded like a man reading his own eulogy. Mrs. Brennan, perhaps we should discuss our options in private. No, tell them we're going to fight this. Catherine interrupted by turning her tablet to face the room. Mr. Harrington, perhaps you'd like to explain this to your clients. The room went quiet. This is an email dated March 3, 2022 from Gerald Brennan to Victor Harrington. Subject line, terminating services. She read it aloud. Victor, I am ending our professional relationship. Your recommendation that I include Robert in my estate plan, despite his years of financial exploitation and his treatment of Lydia, is unacceptable. I will be engaging new counsel. Catherine looked up over her glasses. You previously represented Gerald Brennan. You were terminated because you advocated for Robert's interests over Gerald's clearly stated wishes. And you have now accepted this case against Gerald's estate without disclosing that conflict of interest to your current clients. Their attorney's face had gone the color of wet cement. Kathleen turned to stare at him. You told me we would win. He had nothing to offer. He stood abruptly, gathering his briefcase with hands that weren't entirely steady. I need to review these documents. We should speak privately, Mrs. Brennan. Speak privately, you're leaving right now in the middle of this. He was already moving toward the door, walking with the careful stiffness of a man whose career was unraveling beneath his feet. Victor, Kathleen called after him. Victor. The conference room door closed behind him with a soft, definitive click. Kathleen stood frozen, abandoned by her own attorney in front of everyone she had hoped to impress. Robert hadn't spoken in several minutes. He sat slumped in his chair staring at the floor, a man who had spent his entire life following Kathleen's lead, now watching her lead them both over the edge of something they couldn't come back from. Amber was crying quietly in her chair. I couldn't tell whether it was the money or the humiliation. Kathleen turned back to me one final time. The mask was completely gone. What was underneath it was just desperation. And beneath that, something that might, for the first time, have been the very beginning of actual regret. Lydia, her voice broke. We're still family, blood is blood, can't we talk about this? I stood up from the table. Kathleen, you stopped being my family on July 15, 2010. You signed the document yourself. I didn't make that choice, you did. I gathered my folder and looked at her steadily. I don't hate you, I genuinely feel sorry for you, but you have no claim on me, not legally, not emotionally, not in any way that matters. I turned to Catherine. Can we continue with the remaining articles? Catherine nodded. Kathleen sat down heavily. She didn't speak again for the rest of the reading. Catherine turned to the next section with practiced calm. Article 9, Charitable Bequests. The representatives from all three organizations straightened in their seats. I direct that the following gifts be made from my estate. $500,000 to Seattle Children's Hospital, to be used for the establishment of a scholarship fund for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. $300,000 to Habitat for Humanity Northwest, for the construction of affordable housing in the greater Seattle area. $200,000 to the Olympic National Park Foundation, for wilderness preservation and environmental education programs. Dr. Patricia Wells from Seattle Children's Hospital nodded with quiet solemnity. Gerald was one of our most consistent supporters for over 2 decades. This gift will help hundreds of families. The Habitat for Humanity representative added, we've built 6 homes with his previous donations. This will fund at least 4 more. Catherine continued, I also request that my daughter Lydia continue the charitable giving programs I established during my lifetime at her full discretion. I trust her judgment completely. I found my voice. I'll honor everything Uncle Gerald built. A thought settled over me as I looked at the 3 charity representatives sitting in this room. They weren't here because the law required their presence. They were here because Uncle Gerald had specifically asked them to come. He had wanted witnesses, neutral, credible people who could testify to exactly what had taken place here today. If Kathleen and Robert tried to press the matter further, Uncle Gerald had already anticipated every move and positioned people accordingly. Dr. Wells caught my eye and offered a small, warm smile. "Gerald talked about you constantly. Every board meeting, every donor event, Lydia did this, Lydia achieved that. He was so proud of you, every single time." I blinked back fresh tears. Even in death, Uncle Gerald had surrounded me with people who believed in me. When Catherine finished reading the final articles, she looked at me. "Lydia, as sole beneficiary and executor, would you like to say a few words?" I hadn't planned to speak, but 47 pairs of eyes were on me, and I understood that there were things worth saying not for Kathleen's benefit but for my own. I rose from my seat. "Most of you knew Uncle Gerald far longer than I did. He took me in when I was 13 years old and had nothing. He gave me a home, an education, and most importantly, a family that chose to love me." I looked around the room at the Brennan Property Holdings employees who had watched me grow from an intern into a CFO, at the charity representatives who had witnessed Uncle Gerald's generosity across decades. "With this inheritance, I intend to continue everything he built. The properties will be managed with the same integrity he established. The charitable commitments will be honored. And I'll be creating a new scholarship fund, the Brennan STEM Scholarship, for children from difficult family situations who need someone to believe in them." My eyes found Kathleen, still rigid in her chair. "As for my biological relatives, I hold no grudge. I've made peace with what happened, but peace doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen, and it doesn't mean opening doors I've worked hard to close." I took a breath. Uncle Gerald taught me that family is about choice. The people who show up for you when everything falls apart, those are your family. By that definition, the people in this room who knew Gerald, who worked beside him, who respected him, you are more my family than the people who share my DNA. I sat back down. The room held its silence for a long moment. Then Thomas Ellison, the auditor, began to clap. Others followed. Kathleen didn't move. Catherine formally concluded the reading at 3:47 in the afternoon. "The will has been read in its entirety. All legal requirements have been satisfied. Ms. Brennan, you may contact our office next week to begin the transfer process. The estate should be fully settled within 14 business days." People began to rise, quiet conversations starting around the room. Kathleen stood slowly, like a woman who had aged 10 years in the space of 2 hours. Robert was already shuffling toward the door without looking at anyone. Amber gathered her things and followed her father in silence. Kathleen lingered. She turned back to look at me one final time. Her makeup had smeared at the corners of her eyes. The confident woman who had walked into this room expecting millions now looked diminished, smaller than I remembered her being somehow. She opened her mouth. I watched her lips begin to form what might have been the start of "I'm sorry." Then she closed her mouth, turned, and walked out. I watched her go, this woman who had thrown me away and made it legal. Who had shown up 15 years later expecting to profit from what she'd done. I felt a brief flicker of something, not satisfaction, not vindication, something more complicated than either. The particular emptiness that arrives when a chapter finally, completely closes. Dr. Wells from Seattle Children's Hospital approached me as the room cleared, shaking my hand warmly. "Gerald talked about you every time we met. He told me once that taking you in was the best decision he ever made." She pressed her business card into my palm. "When you're ready to discuss the scholarship fund, please call me directly." Elena appeared at my side and squeezed my arm. "You did it," she said quietly. "Gerald would be so proud." I looked at the photograph of Uncle Gerald I had brought with me. I hoped she was right. 1 week after the will reading, Catherine Merrill filed a formal complaint with the Washington State Bar Association. The subject, Victor Harrington's ethical violations. I didn't ask her to do it. She did it because it was her professional obligation. When an attorney witnesses another attorney violating the rules of professional conduct, reporting is not optional. The complaint outlined 3 violations: conflict of interest, failure to disclose his prior representation of Gerald Brennan, and misrepresentation of the strength of his client's case when he knew, or should have known, their legal position was fundamentally untenable. Catherine kept me updated. 2 months after the filing, the Bar Association issued its ruling. Harrington was suspended from practicing law for 6 months, fined $15,000, and required to complete additional ethics training. Within weeks of the suspension, 3 of his largest clients quietly transferred their business to other firms. I heard through the legal community that his annual revenue dropped by roughly $200,000 that year. Elena asked me once whether I felt satisfied by what had happened to him. I didn't do anything to him, I told her. He did this to himself, I just happened to be in the room when the consequences arrived. That was simply the truth. I hadn't sought his downfall. I hadn't filed the complaint. He had made his own choices, taking a case he knew was ethically compromised, deceiving clients who trusted him, betting he could win through pressure and intimidation rather than merit. Some people build their own prisons without any outside help. 3 weeks after the will reading, an email appeared in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line, please read. The message was longer than I expected. Kathleen had never been comfortable with written communication. She preferred phone calls where she could control the tone, redirect, interrupt. This was different in ways that felt deliberate. Lydia, I know you probably won't read this, but I need to say some things. I've been thinking about what happened at the will reading. I was angry and I said things I shouldn't have, but I want you to know that I understand I made mistakes when you were young. I was overwhelmed. Your father and I were struggling financially. Things got away from us. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a chance to make things right. We're still family, Lydia. Blood doesn't disappear because of legal papers. I'm your mother. Nothing can change that. Can we talk? I think if we just sat down together we could work through this. I love you. I always have, Mom. I read it 3 times. Then I called Dr. Park, my therapist, and read it aloud to her over the phone. What do you notice about it? She asked. I thought carefully. She acknowledges mistakes but doesn't name a single one specifically. She explains herself with circumstances, financial pressure, being overwhelmed. She says she isn't asking for money, then immediately pivots to working through this. And she still signs it Mom, even though she legally relinquished that title. What do you want to do? I took 2 days to write my response. It was 4 sentences. Kathleen, I've read your email. I forgave you a long time ago for my own sake, not yours, but I don't want a relationship with you. Please don't contact me again. She didn't reply. I felt no guilt, only clarity. 2 months after the will reading, a letter arrived at my Seattle address. Not an email, an actual handwritten letter on plain paper, in a slightly wrinkled envelope with a Portland postmark. The return address read T. Warren. Amber had taken her ex-husband's name when she married. I opened it reluctantly, prepared for more of the same. What I found was different. Lydia, I'm not writing this to ask for anything. I don't want money, I don't want forgiveness. I just need to say something I should have said 15 years ago. The night Mom and Dad made you leave, I was watching from my bedroom window. I saw you sitting on the porch with those garbage bags. I watched for 4 hours. I saw you alone in the dark, waiting, and I never came down. I could have. I was 15, old enough to bring you water, old enough to sit beside you, old enough to at least tell you I was sorry. Instead, I stood at the window like a coward and did nothing. That's haunted me ever since. Every time Mom talked about you always blaming you, always making herself the victim, I kept thinking about that window. About what I didn't do. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for a relationship. I just wanted you to know that I know what I did was wrong. I failed you when you needed your family most. You deserved better from your older sister. If you never want to hear from me again, I understand completely. But I couldn't let another year pass without telling you the truth. Amber. I read it 4 times. It was the first genuinely honest thing anyone in my biological family had ever said to me. I didn't write back immediately. I needed time to understand what, if anything, I actually wanted to do with this unexpected opening. 4 months after the will reading, I wrote back to Amber. Dr. Park had helped me think it through carefully, not what I felt obligated to offer, not what would appear generous or magnanimous, but what I genuinely wanted for myself. The answer surprised me. I didn't want to shut Amber out entirely. Her letter had been the first real acknowledgement of what happened that night. No excuses, no deflections, no hidden requests, just accountability. But I also wasn't ready to trust her. 15 years of silence doesn't dissolve because of one honest paragraph. So I wrote back with conditions. Amber, I've read your letter many times. I appreciate that you acknowledged what happened without making excuses. That takes courage. I'm not ready for a full relationship, but I'm open to cautious contact under these conditions. First, no communication through Mom or Dad. I've ended contact with them permanently and I need that boundary respected without question. Second, no discussions about money, inheritance, or anything connected to Uncle Gerald's estate. Ever. Third, I reserve the right to end any conversation without explanation. If I go quiet, I need you to respect it. If these conditions work for you, we can start with a monthly video call, 15 minutes, low pressure. We can talk about our lives, surface level at first, and build from there if it makes sense. This isn't me saying everything is forgiven and forgotten. It's me saying I'm willing to see if there's something worth building, but it has to be on my terms. Let me know if you accept, Lydia. Her reply came 3 days later. One word: accepted. I scheduled the first call for the following Saturday, 15 minutes. That was all I could commit to. The first video call happened on a Saturday afternoon in September 2025, 6 months after the will reading. I sat at my home office desk watching the seconds count down to 2 o'clock. My heart was beating faster than it had during the will reading itself. This felt more exposed somehow. Standing up to Kathleen had been about protecting myself from an attack. This was about choosing, deliberately, to be vulnerable. The call connected. Amber's face filled the screen. She looked different from the will reading, less polished, more tired but also more real. Like she'd stopped performing for an audience she no longer had. "Hi," she said. "Hi." We looked at each other for a moment. 15 years compressed into a small rectangle on a laptop screen. "I wasn't sure you'd actually answer," she admitted. "I almost didn't." That broke something loose. Amber laughed, a short, nervous, relieved sound, and I found myself almost smiling. We kept it light, as I'd said we would, surface level. She told me about her work. She was training to become a nail technician, studying for her license. She mentioned her kids, Jaden, 8, and Lily, 6, without asking me to be their aunt. I told her about the business, about Seattle weather. About nothing too personal. At 14 minutes I said we should wrap up. "Lydia," her voice stopped me before I could end the call. "Thank you for giving me a chance. I know you didn't have to." "This is step 1, I said. "We'll see where it goes." "Step 1 is more than I expected." We scheduled another call for the following month. After she hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, not quite sure what to do with what I was feeling. I didn't know if Amber and I would ever become something you could call real sisters. Maybe we'd stay in this careful, tentative middle distance forever. But for the first time, I was the one deciding what happened next. That power was worth more than any inheritance. March 14th, 2026. 1 year exactly since the will reading that changed everything. I stood outside a modest commercial building on Capitol Hill, the first property Uncle Gerald had ever purchased, back in 1987, when he was a 34-year-old with a vision and barely enough money for a down payment. The building had been renovated the previous fall. New windows, updated systems, fresh landscaping. But today I was here for something else. A bronze plaque had been mounted beside the main entrance. The Gerald R. Brennan Building, in memory of a man who chose love over blood, 1953–2025. I touched the letters of his name. The metal was cold under my fingertips. In the year since the will reading, Brennan property holdings had grown by 12%, bringing the portfolio value to $26.5 million. Occupancy rates had remained above 95%. We had expanded into 2 new properties and upgraded 3 existing ones. More importantly, the Brennan STEM Scholarship had awarded its first grants, 5 students from difficult family situations, each receiving full funding for summer programs in science and mathematics. Dr. Wells had helped select the recipients. Amber and I still talked once a month. The conversations had become slightly easier. We'd moved from 15 minutes to 25. I'd seen photographs of her kids. She'd seen photographs of my apartment. We weren't sisters in any traditional sense, but we were something. Something that didn't have a name yet, which felt right. Kathleen and Robert had stopped trying to reach me. I didn't know what their lives looked like now. I found that I didn't need to know. Elena walked up beside me, looking at the plaque. "You okay?" I considered the question honestly. "I'm peaceful," I said. "That's better than okay." Uncle Gerald had spent 15 years teaching me that family is a choice. It had taken me until now to fully understand that the choice applied to myself as well, that I was allowed to choose what I kept, what I let go, and what I built in the space between. The sky over Seattle was clear for the first time in weeks. I could see all the way to the mountains. If I examine my own story through a psychological lens, there's a concept called conditional self-worth, the belief that you are only valuable if certain people approve of you. I spent the first 13 years of my life living inside that belief. My mother's indifference felt like evidence that I simply didn't matter. What saved me wasn't Uncle Gerald's money or his estate or his name on a building. It was his unconditional, unqualified acceptance. He saw me for exactly who I was, not who I was supposed to be, not who would have been more convenient. Here is what I want you to carry from this story. You do not need anyone's permission to know your own worth. You have every right to set boundaries with family, with parents, with blood. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself. Reconciliation is something you choose for yourself. These are two different things, and no one gets to decide which one you offer. Your story belongs to you. You're the one who gets to write what comes next.